Earlier this week on this program, I argued there must be something bordering on a royal commission to investigate the appalling and damaging government response to coronavirus. I made the point that the message was repeated that only public health experts were allowed to guide public policy. But we've just been visited in this country by an expert like Professor Jai Bhattacharya, who along with many were ignored when they argued a totally different approach to things like lockdown. I made the point that the Prime Minister-designate in Italy, Giorgia Meloni, will institute a parliamentary inquiry in Italy into what Meloni calls, quote, the disastrous management of the pandemic, unquote. And she wants a commission in front of which, quote, everyone will be called to assume their responsibilities. Well, we have another distinguished visitor to our shores, the retired former UK Supreme Court Judge, Lord Jonathan Sumption. Lord Sumption was a Justice of the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom between 2012 and 2018. He delivered the BBC Wreath Lectures for 2019. He's in Australia as a guest of the Robert Menzies Institute. But he described last year the COVID lockdowns as, quote, the most significant interference in personal freedom in the history of Britain, unquote. He said, quote, the British state exercised coercive powers over its citizens on a scale never previously attempted, unquote. Now remember, this is a former judge of the Supreme Court in Britain. He said, quote, the government has deliberately stoked fear over coronavirus while behaving like an authoritarian regime, relying on police state tactics, unquote. And he said, quote, the ease in which people could be terrorised into surrendering basic freedoms, which are fundamental to your existence, came as a shock to me in March 2022. He said, I do not doubt the seriousness of the epidemic, but I believe the history will look back on the measures taken to contain it as a monument of collective hysteria. Well, Lord Sumption joins me. Jonathan Sumption, thank you for your time. Why is it that those politicians and so-called health experts telling government what they wanted to hear will seemingly escape without sanction while the public have suffered?
Well, that depends on what the various inquiries that are in progress in many different countries, including the UK, come up with. But I think that people are now beginning to look back on the lockdown period as a period in which some very strange things happened to themselves and to the society in which they lived.
You made the point at some length, which is worth repeating, and forgive me, but for the benefit of our viewers, Lord Sumption said this, and I quote, the real question is this serious enough to warrant putting most of our population to house imprisonment, wrecking our economy for an indefinite period, destroying businesses that honest and hard-working people have taken years to build up, saddling future generations with debt, depression, stress, heart attacks, suicides, and unbelievable distress inflicted on millions of people who are not especially vulnerable and will suffer only mild symptoms or none at all. So, he said, the real question is all this imprisonment and wrecking of the economy justified? Jonathan Sumption, that's precisely what happened here. What redress do people have?
Legally, none. Politically, there should be a big backlash. I don't know whether there will be, but I think that whatever you may think about the efficacy of lockdowns, and there are conflicting opinions about that, one thing is, I think, clear about most Western governments, certainly in Europe, and that is that nobody actually tried to even assess the consequences of a lockdown. They simply said, we think that this will be medically beneficial. That's a large question in itself. They never measured the benefits that they saw in the lockdown medically against the medical damage and the societal damage, the sheer economic, educational and social destructiveness of a policy which prevented human beings from doing what is actually essential to their humanity, namely engaging with each other.
Wonderful, magnificent.